Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm the co-founder and CEO at Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools for life science companies across the globe. And we've been working with them over the last 13 years to help them with virtualizing their advisory boards, coming up with digital ways to do medical education, coming up with ways to create synergies between CROs and investigators. And even with our Insight Events platform that we've just launched recently, having large company-wide hackathons and sales and MSL training and everything in between. But more importantly, at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations that we have with some of the digital provocateurs, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. But it's not just a conversation. We need to really do a lot of work to sustain these conversations. And this is precisely why Impetus has created this concept of the longitudinal expert engagement plan, where we have a series of asynchronous and synchronous touch points with various healthcare stakeholders over a period of time so that we can ruminate and process, drive ideas, create, co-create, build momentum around new policies, procedures, new creative, new documents. And this is actually what we do at Impetus really well, with all of this brought to you with white glove service. So I'm really pleased to have one of these thought leaders at the table today. This is actually Joa Bokas, and he is a leading expert in wearable technologies, also a keynote speaker and a globally recognized business thought leader, mentor, advisor, and entrepreneur. Leveraging Boka's expertise and experience, he is currently the CEO, keynote speaker, social media influencer, and advisor at Digital Salutum. This is actually a B2B consulting company that's helping tech brands with their digital branding and social media marketing online interactions. In addition, he sits on several advisory and editorial boards for global healthcare and technology organizations. He's also a top 100 global digital health influencer, and he was recently named one of the top 30 health tech IT influencers by Health Tech Magazine in 2020. So welcome, Joa. So happy to have you on the show today.
Hi, Natalie. A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely. Very excited about the fact that you are sort of a self-proclaimed wearables expert. Tell us a little bit about what is your fascination with wearables, and tell us a little bit about how you landed in this entrepreneurial space that you find yourself today.
Oh, sure. Well, a bit of a background. So I'm Portuguese. I'm a global citizen based in UK for the past 20 years. I always had an interest in professional sport and in health. They're my two main passions, sport and health. I actually graduated with a professional sports degree here in UK and worked for a professional sport club. But also I've been in health for a long time. But going back to your question around wearables, it all came by an interest of managing my own health, self-management, and it's a big movement for a few years around self-management and self-help, and I was actually doing a startup in 2015 with a business partner. He was more the technology person. We were building a platform for collecting data, health data, to do some predictive analytics, and the data was collected by wearables. So this was actually in 2015, and my interest came from there. I started using wearables, testing wearables. But even beforehand, I don't know if you remember that, I was in corporate wellness for a long time, and we used to have the pedometers, single digits, 8,000 steps, 7,000 steps. So even over probably 15 years ago, I was already kind of interested in what's the new technology coming up and what the things that are occurring. And I was working with a lot of Nordic health tech startups back then. So my involvement in digital health is kind of probably over a decade ago, even though in 2015, that's where you all take off.
Beautiful. So what are you currently doing with wearables? Are you consulting with companies on how to leverage this? Tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing in that space.
Yeah, sure. Well, a couple of things really. I was working with a lot of startups. Now I'm consulting. I was actually doing a lot of keynote speaking pre-COVID-19. I was starting to travel quite a lot around the world, probably one or twice a week, doing talks in different places. And as you know, in life sciences, healthcare, and even in pharma, the wearable technologies, I mean, are a very hot topic because all companies, large, small, and medium, are trying to leverage these technologies, understanding how they can actually integrate them, whether there is inpatient treatment, in triage, or existing systems that they already have. Because this main most companies are using already technology in one form or another. So wearables are actually an excellent vehicle to collect data and doing other things to kind of bring it all together. But one of the biggest challenges, understanding the real value, and we talk about barriers later. I have more insights for you further down, but are a lot of things to consider. It's not just about buying a wearable and using them, the technological challenges, the human being side of things, because we're human beings, we are very imperfect. We do things and then we break our pattern of behavior, and with data, if we don't have a sustainable pattern of behavior, if we don't have the data, it's kind of always a bit meaningless. So it's a lot of things to consider. But with regards to wearables, I'm doing lots of different things really.
So let's actually get into what are some of the more popular wearables that you find yourself speaking about and describing to pharmaceutical, biotech, and life science companies?
Well, good question. I mean, the more, Natalie, the more well known, just to give you a bit of background history, you know, Fitbit only launched the first fitness tracker back in 2009, and only in 2011 kind of broadcasted well to the marketplace. So wearables are kind of fairly recent, less than a decade ago, or just around a decade. So I would say the smartwatches are probably the most popular now, but things are evolving and changing very fast, from smart rings to smart belts, because the technology has moved so fast that actually the wearables are becoming smaller and smaller, more capability, more technology power, if you like. But also these sensors that go on a watch or go on a bracelet, they can go anywhere. They can go in a piece of clothing, they can go on your shoes, they can go in a belt. So it's kind of difficult to um, follow all the trends at the same time because things are evolving so much. And I'm not gonna play devil's advocate in here, but now we're even talking about not using any wearables and collecting the same data that we can get from wearables, which is a bit of another big stride in towards innovation with Wi-Fi, remote monitoring, and also the environment that, for example, with smart house and smart tech, they can collect the data from our movement, from our patterns. So we're even talking about not having wearables and getting the same type of vital signs and data acquisition, which is incredible.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. COVID-19 rocked our world for many people in a terrible, horrendous, tragic way. But there has been some silver linings in the fact that it has been an accelerant in being a bit of a tailwind, if you will, in the digital transformation of a lot of life science companies. And part of the tragedy was the immediate abrupt stop that happened with a lot of life science companies, clinical studies, clinical trials, because many of them were leveraging the sort of standard way that people were entering into clinical trials, going physically into a physician or a CRO to do, a regular reading of this large document and consenting, and then going in for regular maintenance and monitoring in person. So I'm just curious about what has happened or what have you observed has happened with the wearable world as it applies like, what did it look like pre-COVID? And what is it looking like post-COVID as it relates to pharmaceutical clinical trials?
Well, good question. I think one of the highlights, if you like, Natalie, from the COVID situation is we realize actually we could be doing much more in a different way. Let me give you a practical example. With the COVID situation, the hospitals they're trying to avoid all, let's say, non-COVID patients to go there because of the risk. But how do we monitor these people? How do we kind of send them home early and say, actually, we keep an eye on them or avoid them to come back, return to hospitalization? Well, with remote monitoring, with wearables. And I think before COVID, the wearables were kind of on most people's radar. But now I believe the COVID situation really highlighted what we should be doing, what we could be doing. I was actually talking to a very large global company on my digital health and wearables YouTube channel, and they have a couple of case studies in here in UK, in Wales, that with their remote monitoring and the wearables, they can send people on discharge from hospitalization early and keep monitoring them. So now we really see in practical terms what we're supposed to be doing. So I think COVID, of course, has been tragic around the world, but serve as well to kind of push us to do a bit faster what we could have been doing probably a few years ago, you know.
So in your opinion, wearables has permitted an opportunity. I'm just going to focus on clinical trials because this is the main component of company innovation and discovery. And again, filling the pocketbooks of a sustainable, company that's going to scale. Is we are now getting into a place where people can choose if they're going to go into a hospital or an institution to get the continued follow-up, or choose to do it remotely, basically from anywhere in the world. What is your generalized thought on the future of decentralized or hybrid clinical trials as it relates to the ability to capture data easily, quickly, through patient-reported outcomes, and getting a large volume of data in a way that we have never received it before? What do you think that impact is going to have on clinical trial recruitment status, the fact that many of them won't have to close because they couldn't recruit, and maybe also the impact on a more global inclusion and diversity with a greater scope of patients? So just curious about your perspectives on the impact that wearables are going to have on all of that.
Yeah, sure. The firm, I actually done some keynotes for very large pharma brands, and pharma have been talking about disrupting clinical trials for quite some time, and also been using wearables. And the main big pharma are using wearables in one form or another. And decentralizing clinical trials, wearables are excellent for that because they are a vehicle to kind of connect the dots, patient data, and of course the trial. I believe is highly effective if the patients are on the same page. Let me try to explain that. I think one of the big misconceptions and barriers also with wearables is not just about giving the person a wearable. It's about making sure that they're well educated, they engaged with wearable, because some of the wearable users, they don't see the value behind it. So if I don't see the value, I'm more likely to drop out of using the wearable after a couple of weeks. It's like going to the gym. In January, everybody thinks, oh, I'm going to get fit and lose weight. And then by February, March, you're breaking your pattern and the gym membership goes after 6 months. With the wearables, they're not concrete studies on that, but it's a very similar phenomenon that we use it for 2-3 months. And if we don't have, personally, I have a general interest in fitness. I use them, I swap them around, but not everybody is like that. So we need to, I think, two things that the pharma companies need to consider really well, I mean, very carefully for decentralized clinical trials and virtual clinical trials in this case, is the education piece, not just around the condition or the clinical trial that they're trying to do, but around the whole flow system, using the wearable, getting the data. It's sometimes very simple things such as make sure you charge the wearable, because if you don't charge the wearable, it runs out of battery, you don't have data, and also you break the pattern. It's not just running out of battery. That means you broke the pattern. You need to get it back. But also the long-term engagement, those things that we make sure that people are engaged with using the wearable effectively. They have an interest. They kind of happy and clear what they should be doing, because it's always a in health is always a gap in education piece, and I think that's extremely important. So all the things are aligned.
Yeah, no, so really important points, Joao. So I think it's also interesting, as you pointed out, the importance of the patient, and I guess a lot of attributes associated with the right kind of patient avatar, if you will, for being in these kinds of studies, these decentralized trials, or leveraging wearables, because there has to be some sort of level of commitment, education, because you're carting something physical around with you, right? There has to be a commitment of doing that. So with all of that said, there's probably a argument for a higher level of inclusion and diversity. So not necessarily what I would call biohackers, so people who have a very vested interest in their health. They're the ones who are proactively chasing the data, but maybe some of the other folks who may not necessarily always have access or want to carry things around. Tell us a little bit about the second generation of sensors, biological sensors located in things like clothing, patches, and what is that going to do and help us with long-term and sustainable monitoring of patients?
Well, certainly is a kind of a development in technological means, if you like, because the technology becomes more advanced and also gives us an option. Not everybody wants to have a smartwatch or a fitness tracker, so might use a wearable in a different shape or form. And if we talk about smart patches actually have a lot of benefit because they light, they go in a certain part of the body, but also the majority of them, they don't have a long-term battery span. They might have 7 days, 5, 10 days maximum. So there's certainly an issue there. But we're seeing things such as smart pills, and we're seeing, as you mentioned, the sensors in the clothing. We even now seeing hearables like the AirPods having some the same kind of health sensor capabilities, getting a blood pressure monitoring from your ear canal and getting health data from there, because we have the sensing capabilities. Is an American company doing some great work there. So we have a couple of options, but with that, I think the patient, if you give the patient a choice, I think probably people would kind of choose different things, and things would become a bit more fragmented. But yeah, things are evolving very, very fast, and and also things are becoming a bit more reliable. I mean, in terms of technology, because at the beginning we're seeing all these wearables coming out, and the reliability has also been an issue. So now we're seeing things to be a bit more, even though there is no specific benchmark, and the industry doesn't have like a benchmark for wearables, for example, or a clear pathway, if you say. But I think we are entering a very certainly a very exciting few years, because things are happening, and the pharma testing, life science, healthcare companies, everybody's kind of moving along with it, which is good. And I think we've seen a lot of adoption lately. I've personally been talking to a lot of healthcare organizations that are actually considering kind of create offers and solutions and things to be a bit more sophisticated. So good news.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, I find it incredibly exciting. And on that note about the continual evolution and progression of technology, you bring up a lot around batteries, right? So this is actually the talk of the town. We hear this a lot with Tesla, and it's all about batteries and sustainability. So as it relates to battery operated sensors, is there going to be the next generation of these types of tools where they're sort of self-propagating or generating power through Bluetooth? And I'm just thinking specifically about eventually having these, these basically pills that have sensors and that land in different parts of your body, as well as long-term, maybe embedded sensors under your skin or in your cornea or in your earlobe, where you basically don't have to think about it. It becomes ambient, it becomes seamless, just like you typing on a computer and maybe something just reads your information through a computer keyboard, or using computers, and there's being software recognition software that's reading the flush of your face or the temperature of your fingertips or what have you. So I'm just curious around the longevity of these things without having to continually replace them because of battery life.
Very good point. Well, a few years ago, I'm sure you are aware of that in Sweden, they done a test with implantables, with microchip, a very, very small microchip, which the things that you're talking about. It was about a couple of milliliters, like a grain of rice, goes under your skin. A bit controversial because some people, they don't want to have, intrusion in their body, if you like, and also brings other issues about what about if you have an infection, other potentially medical issues. It was about a project of 4,000 people, 4,000 average citizens, let's say, and they had health tracking capabilities. They had the ID capabilities. You could go to the gym, you could go to the office instead of having keys and cards with you. You could all have all of that in a very small implantable chip. So, and I think, to be honest, Natalie, that's where we are heading. We're heading in that direction. Now we're seeing smart bands, we're seeing lots of different things, and the wearables are actually evolving very, very fast. I'll give you an example. In 2020, the second quarter, about 30% of the marketplace is hearables. Is actually not smartwatches or fitness trackers. So from hearables, maybe we go to the next phase will be implantables or will be smart pills. Eventually, you'll be a smart belt or, so things are constantly evolving a few years on. Before, it probably would take a decade or two for some change to happen. Now it's very fast. In 1 year or two, a trend really changed. We have 4 or 5 trends ongoing all the time, but then one trend, it really takes off and puts the other 2 or 3 trends in a kind of old-fashioned way, if you like, because things are moving so fast.
Absolutely. It's a mind-boggling area, and I find it fascinating and like to watch it myself. Now, as we start, and I don't know if we're on the 3rd or 4th generation of my questions here, but when we think about the word wearable, it has something to do with our, our skin, either inside our skin and our bodies or sort of on the surface, right? With wearing something. But you had alluded to the idea earlier that there still can be sensors, but in the environment that we live and breathe in, our cars, smart houses. We talk a lot about Alexa and Siri and other sorts of home devices that are kind of watching the movement, senior people potentially falling, respiration rates, how you're moving within the home, and maybe determining gait and predetermining neurodegenerative disease as an example. So curious about your thoughts on how rapidly we're going to start to see some of these wearables becoming more environmental sensors.
Well, Natalie, is happening already. A lady called Dina Katabi from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the United States has been working on this Wi-Fi connectivity with I mean, environmental connectivity, replacing wearables, gathering vital signs and other behavioral data for quite some time. And there is another company doing that that I just found out very recently. So we're heading in that direction, and also we're heading in to the world of connectivity. I mean, these technologies emerging, other emerging technologies are around. This smart homes are smart cities. Now we're seeing all these things kind of evolving and coming together, and we can connect them. That's the thing. They can be connected with us, but can be connected with each other. So if you have an Alexa, you can get notifications there. You can ask questions about the weather. You can ask questions about how many hours you sleep last night. You can ask so many things. And as you mentioned, the world of connectivity is truly happening. And big technology companies such as YY now recently even launched a connectivity hub, an idea hub where you can connect a smart home and gadgets and all world connected. That's the big vision, for everything to be connected with us. We still are the human being, but you know, so yeah,
Yeah,
exciting.
tapping into the collective consciousness, or becoming the cog in the big, large internet world, right? What's that next echelon? And I'm also just thinking here around, we've talked a lot around what the progression of the hardware is, but obviously integrated in all that are the algorithms, the computing power. And we are hearing a lot about progression with quantum computing and all sorts of other things. But the units or the mechanisms at which all of these data sets are coming in, and we're doing something with it, we're learning something from it. These things continue through, like, again, machine learning, through they get smarter over time. Give us some of your thoughts on the progression of the algorithm as sort of, computer engineering around these sensors, and going from analog data, i.e. a stethoscope, where you're listening to somebody's heart, and in a parentheses of a very specific period of time, you get a heart rate or blood pressure, to something that's continuous, right? And so, and what are we doing with that data? So what's your thoughts about the computer algorithms behind all of this?
Well, very exciting. For example, artificial intelligence in healthcare is very is very popular, and technologies and the big companies are using them. But actually, artificial intelligence and machine learning, they've been around for quite a few years. I don't know if you remember, but it was an American a TV show where they put IBM Watson playing against the contestants. And I mean, of course, the machine learning was so fast that come up with like 99% of the answers while we're trying to figure out. So the algorithms are very sophisticated. And now what is really exciting, Natalie, is that the combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the big data from wearables. I think a few years ago, what I've been seeing is, a few years ago, we had the technology, but probably we didn't have as much as the algorithms, the intelligence, and the data. But now we have so much data, we have the technology, we have the computing power, and we have the expertise to work around it, because now many companies have data scientists, for example. They just do that, figure out how to create more sophisticated algorithms for healthcare, for pharma, for life sciences. So also other emerging technologies are kind of born from that. So for example, now we have edge to cloud computing. We have collecting data at the edge and staying at the edge without need to transfer to the cloud. In an healthcare setting, for example, if you go in an ambulance, if you get a real life data at the edge, the paramedics can have actually data at the incident before getting to the hospital, and figure out what the person was about, what there was the electronic medical record, or if they have any conditions. So these type of things, I mean, make a really groundbreaking change for healthcare. We even seeing now with drones, of course, transporting medical supplies around the world. And how do we control the drones? Well, is by computing power, by a combination of machine learning, a combination of course other technologies evolve, which I'm probably not even aware of. But all these things are really happening now, and they are evolving very, very fast. But edge computing is very complex. But what is very exciting is that what uh, what is generated around it, from what one, let's say, main element of emerging technology can be replicated in 3 or 4 places, to clouds, to big data, to artificial intelligence, to machine learning, to RPA recently, robotic process automation. So all these things are kind of new technologies that probably come from, let's say, one big technology, and computing power is certainly a very important one.
Absolutely. So many good things to dig into there. And for the audience not being aware what edge computing, it's really the ability to keep the data very close to the end user's devices without actually having to transport and get encrypted and put into this big data pool. So there's a lot of potential implications on data security because it doesn't have to cross those barriers. It also has some implications on speed of data transport. So how quickly can you get the data? But it also potentially has some implications on, as you have mentioned, interoperability, deciding at source who is going to have access to that data. Is it going to be several institutions? Is it going to be into a investigator database or a data lake? And ultimately, it's interesting because there may be some eventual implications on data ownership. I've talked about this before in other episodes about non-fungible tokens or tokenizing data, and maybe eventually at the source being able to monetize the data that is being transported from edge to the cloud to whoever's using it, in more of a blockchain or an Ethereum sort of way. So with all of that said, maybe you can discuss some of the concerns of, or some of the optimizations of edge as it relates to security, speed, and interoperability.
Well, interoperability and the communication between systems and devices is always, is always a complex issue. It's not just about gathering the data. It's about the transference of the data, the communication between systems, and in healthcare is extremely complex because, for example, in UK and even globally, but in UK, um, hospitals, they use different technology providers for different systems for different things. So it's extremely complex, and so interoperability is also a big issue. What a system is in an hospital in London is not the same the hospital in Manchester, for example. So is an issue there. Also other related barriers about maybe the lack of um, data personalization, because the data comes in a lot of different shapes and forms, and also scrutinizing right away is extremely complex, isn't it? Because ideally, for example, as a clinician, you might get 6, 7, 8, 9 data sets, but in all honesty, you're only interested in 1 or 2. So what I see a very big role in technology in doing that kind of scrutiny, if you like. So,
Yeah.
and I believe edge to cloud has a very big role to play there, to probably isolate what you want to see and what you don't want to see.
During this major progression and evolution, this rapid transformation that's happening in healthcare today, you're seeing almost like a lost city getting overstrewn, if you will, by all the new incumbents or the people moving into the town, right? So you're looking at this confluence of new and old, and people trying to, in some ways, kind of band-aid what some of the old systems are, and the old methodologies, the old thinking, and the old curriculums. And other people just sort of saying, I'm scrapping that, we're starting brand new. But in the midst of this, you've got this ecosystem of complexity.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, change doesn't really happen unless we really integrate some of these new things, the wearables, the sensors, the new way that we're retrieving patient-reported outcomes, the way we're utilizing data. If it's not built into people's workflows, building in automaticity, part of people's regular day-to-day habits. And so there's a lot of questions as it relates to the future of the physician in this equation. Before, when they were working with analog, single data, single patient, very rudimentary data, it was easy to look at a single electronic health record and be able to ruminate and process and deliver notes and figure out the next progression and where that patient is going to move in the trajectory. Now, with this advent of this whole circuitous and sustained constant level of data, is what is going to transpire? Can a human being really understand and translate that into something that's usable and for example, diagnosing a patient? How much more reliant are physicians and diagnosticians like radiologists, et cetera? How much are they going to become reliant on these robotics, these algorithms? And what is going to happen to those roles? So just curious about your sense on the future of the healthcare business model and the future of basically what the physician's roles will be.
Very interesting, and also complex and deep. Is a deep question to address. Natalie, that's really great. When you were talking, I was thinking about a specific quote and also a question that comes up in the world of healthcare and physicians and thought leaders in the conferences before COVID and now is, will AI replace doctors? And the question, I mean, the answer is no. I don't know who invented the code, but we invented this code, but AI will not replace the doctor, but doctors will be replaced if they don't use AI. So, I mean, doctors, I mean, because everybody needs to kind of adjust, you know. But you were talking about the business model in healthcare, and from triage to diagnosis to diagnostics to self-care to prevention to clinical solution support. I mean, we go through a major transformation, and of course, technology plays a big role. And I mentioned AI because when you were thinking, I was thinking probably AI is at the core of addressing most of these, let's say, capabilities. Care delivery. The care delivery is really important. We want more patient-driven outcomes, but how do we achieve that now is actually becoming also more challenging because we're getting more data. In our hands, we have better technology, we have better systems, better processes, better people, more informed doctors, clinicians, but also we have this vague now, a lot of data coming at us. And if you go to let's say an average GP appointment in UK, you probably get 8 to 10 minutes. I mean, in a face-to-face consultation on average. So it's kind of impossible for the clinicians to get educated around these systems, around technology or wearables or whatever that is. It's very difficult to have a clear picture, or you know the patient. I remember when I was quite young in Portugal, the doctors knew their patients because you probably live in a very small place that you have 20 or 30 patients and you know them since they're born. You kind of follow them up. It's a very different reality in the world of healthcare because you see a patient and you might not even see them again. But what is very challenging is the education piece for the clinicians, because they might be aware of all these technologies, but they might not be very well educated in using them and making the most out of them. Is certainly a challenge there, and they have no time to kind of go and say, actually, I take 2 or 3 hours out of my busy working day to learn about AI or to learn about wearables or to learn about edge to cloud. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, it's a really, really tough, it's really going to be a tough process, and it's going to be iterative. And I think it's going to equally apply not only to the physicians, but patients. is, getting away from sort of the higher social economic status, biohackers, very well vested and very healthy, who want to understand their health, to the more general public, and getting people involved. So we're in this interesting space where there's a lot of innovation happening, and it's can be extremely scary for some people. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of people who look at this as a dystopian type of move, as humans become more cyborg-like. And there's always the question and the issue of data hacking, getting into centralized databases, and especially concerns if things are embeddable and they release drugs at certain increments. We're already hearing about data hacking in homes and thermostats turning on and off and what have you. But where is the bioethical issues, and how are we going to resolve these in this new world, where everything is going to kind of get mechanized within our personal systems?
No, very, very good question. I actually, Natalie, done 159 pages report on health wearables engagement. And in terms of user-related barriers, the second major concern was actually privacy and security concerns. Because people are a bit, they don't trust the big companies, they don't trust the insurer, they don't trust the pharma because they want to make money or they want to use the data, one reason or another. So it's certainly a big barrier there. And I'll give you another example. For example, in corporate wellness, if we use data, if we use wearables, you don't want to have a feeling that there is some kind of surveillance around. How many hours I sleep, even though we're talking about anonymized data and we're talking about protecting employees. People, they still might think, actually, my employer gave me a Fitbit, but they want something in return. So it's always this kind of suspicion as a human being that it is always a second or a third agenda behind it. So that works against innovation and sometimes against the end benefit, or to get the data or to share the data. Or so it's always a barrier to overcome. But I remember pre-COVID, I was actually in a global tech conference in London, and this specialist in cybersecurity gave an example that the biohackers actually, the cyber attack came from a fish tank, because you had a sensor from the fish tank, they could connect with other systems. And it was just mind-boggling, because it's like, who would think that a sensor in a fish tank would kind of be a risk. So
yeah, it's a very hot area, and I think many more years of really delving into that and what does it actually mean. You mentioned earlier in our conversation the idea behind triage, and that algorithms, smart sensors, et cetera, robotics aren't necessarily going to take over the role of the physician, although there's many people who may counter argue you on that and suggest that, for example, radiologists, that there may be fewer of them, as some of these algorithms can be extremely accurate. And I guess the question comes down to, issues where there isn't enough people. We're emerging out of COVID-19. There's a lot of mental health issues that are kind of emerging. We haven't even started to delve into the immensity of this in the population, or PTSD and all sorts of other social impacts. We're also thinking a lot about precision medicine and the real lack of geneticists and people doing genetic counseling. We're here often of many individuals having to wait 2, 3, 4, even 5 years before they can get information that they need. So the question ultimately is can these sensors, algorithms, data get utilized for smart, I don't know, avatars, chatbots, mechanisms at which patients can get triaged, can get the accurate information that they need. It's almost like going to Google before you actually go to physician. So it's a filter. What's your thoughts on this? And is this going to be something that's going to be available within the not so distant future?
Well, very good question, Natalie. I used to go to a lot of technology conference, healthcare conferences, pharma conferences, and the talking about data and big data and the security side used sometimes to frustrate me because we go around and don't have the answer. But whilst you were talking, I was thinking, of course, we can leverage all these chatbots, the automation, augmented for better patient management and care. But we need to do something around the regulatory side, the compliance, and assure people that we're doing things for the right reasons. And let me give you an example. In the Netherlands, they actually took a very, very big leap forward, a very big step forward. I actually interviewed the Secretary Minister of Health from the Netherlands, my YouTube channel, and they created a framework where it became legislation for healthcare organizations to exchange data to facilitate, actually for the benefit, of course, of the patient, is not just for the sake of sharing, but for the benefit of the patient, to access data, exchange data, so rapidly facilitate triage, facilitate treatments, facilitate drug discovery, facilitate what it needs to be done. So, fantastic example for all, let's say, the global professionals, companies, stakeholders around the globe to take a look about maybe implementing something in the same direction, where we of course have to be very cautious about the cybersecurity, the security concerns, the trust, respect the people and the patient in the first place, but also try to find a way that addressing regulation and addressing compliance, we still have to make difficult decisions and make good decisions for things to happen. Otherwise, we're talking about the same issues in 5 or 10 years' time, and I believe no one wants that.
No, absolutely. We only need to think forward in a forward direction. One thing that's really interesting. So let's just say, for example, a pharma company approaches you, Joao, and they ask you, we're really interested in wearables and technologies and things like that, but we're having an issue right now with adherence, patients adhering to our medication. They have to take it multiple times or whatever the reason. What sort of recommendations would you give to a pharma company, or some of the benefits, if you will, of them incorporating some sort of technology or software for them to be able to appropriately measure the percentage of patients that are taking their medications on time or so that they can actually look at those inflection opportunities or part of the patient lifestyles where they can, do some kind of interventions?
No, fantastic question. I think, well, addressing pharma, but also, let's say, the generic market, I think a lot of companies are missing the boat and the opportunity around wearables. Of course, let's say the main purpose is to collect data, inform people, help them with management of their condition or diagnose early or have some sort of intervention. But also, we're missing the opportunity to, for example, to give the patient notifications, to give them message through the wearable, to communicate with them, to engage with them, to remind them. So I give you an example. My Aura Ring, it tells me two hours before is bedtime that bedtime is approaching. So I might want to do something about that. Maybe I don't drink any more coffee. I know I need to get to bed, maybe start to relax or unwind or whatever. So that's a perfect example there that is not just about collecting data and that's it. It's about building systems around that, notifications, efficacy, reminders. So it's not just about, and I'll give you an example. Someone invited me, actually, it didn't happen, but someone invited me, a big publisher, to write a book, Wearables for Marketing Professionals. Because through wearables, you can actually deliver notifications, you can do campaigns, you can engage your clients, you can talk to your employees. It's so many things that you can do through actually a wearable technology device.
Do you see
And I
that
think
happening in the new work from home world that we're living in? Is that going to be a possibility? And is that something that employees should be very afraid of?
it's definitely a possibility. I have not seen it happen, but going back to the pharma example, I mean, a farmer can actually use a wearable to do other things. Of course, the primary, let's say, the primary reason is to collect data and have some kind of intervention with the data, leverage the data as best as they can. But also they could include medication reminders. They could include patterns of change of behavior. They can communicate with them. They can give them prompts to actually do something around the clinical trial or non-clinical trial. Even deliver educational pieces around through messaging. Oh, make sure you walk, or you be active, or you drink water, or you be healthy. So I mean, it I think is a bit of a missed opportunity, because we tend to see things for what they are, and okay, wearables collecting data, but it's a bit more wider than that.
So it is potentially what I was talking about, the triaging part of it, as opposed to all of this information just going to the final healthcare provider. It's being triaged to this smart algorithm who's giving information and talking back and forth. So it's, in some ways, it's a kind of a robotic. It's some sort of a intervener, if you will, to help manage and manipulate and maneuver around people's health. Certainly, I think it's going to be very exciting to see how this also fits into diagnostics. So getting away from the health sickness kind of business model to something that's much more proactive. And I think it'll be very exciting to see, especially with partnerships between wearables and genomic companies, to really get all of those core assets around a person's wellness and being able to track them over time. Sort of switching gears a little bit and talking a little bit about your company called Digital Salutem. Curious about, at a very high level, what sort of things you're providing there as a consulting company, and where does your YouTube channel fit into this?
Sure. Well, Natalie, let me address the latter first. The YouTube channel was about, well, creating. My big vision is to create the biggest healthcare channel in the world in terms of richness of content. So I have the big tech influences there, health tech influences there. I have public health there. I have innovators. I have thought leaders. I have big tech companies interested in a channel. So it's really a resource about bringing these conversations forward. But with regards to Digital Salutem started actually in 2015 through that failure, if you like, of the startup attempt. And I realized very quickly that it was a need for expertise, and it was a need to make healthcare more accessible. And for many years, we work a lot with startups, and we just offer services. We're going through a major rebranding exercise now, that we also offer the best world-in-class technology solution for healthcare. So we have a big partnership with the technology company, and we actually going to ramp up that the operational side. But with regards to consulting, we tend to work with big technology companies now, some major technology companies that have an interest in healthcare, that have an interest in maybe entering a new territory, or maybe want to get industry recognition because maybe naturally, or they were not in healthcare for some years, now they are. And we're seeing big companies now in healthcare, and healthcare is complex, and also they want to be associated with healthcare. So we help them with that because we have a presence in healthcare. People know us globally. I personally brought my profile to the company, and also the last 8-9 years I've been very, very active in the healthcare space. So we start offering digital healthcare transformation to healthcare providers and to other companies that need that expertise. And we combine decades of expertise plus the technology side.
Fantastic. Great way to cap off this wonderful conversation. For anybody listening to this, if you're interested in connecting with Joao Bocas on any of his work with Digital Salutem, or any of the great ideas he has around how you might want to be able to implement some wearable technologies into your organization. We also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to start thinking about how wearables can be applied in your medical team for clinical trials, as an example, how you might want to start to modulate and think about changes in protocols and processes, and how you're working with, between the sponsors and CROs, et cetera. If you're also thinking about leveraging wearables for your marketing, your patient support programs, other sorts of adherence programs, we love to actually have those conversations, and we set up asynchronous and synchronous virtual touch points with payers, patients, allied healthcare providers, and physicians. So you can explore and build on these ideas and be able to implement something brand new for your brand. So please check that out. If you don't mind, please like and subscribe to our channel. And also, we would love if you can leave us a review on our podcast. It will help others to find our material. I want to thank all of you for your time. Thank you, Joelle, for a great conversation, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.